Hello students. So the topic of our today's presentation is the second life process, respiration. Okay. Now in our previous videos, we have discussed that we require energy for our daily activities and the source of that energy is food, right? But now how this food is exactly going to provide us with the energy we require, we are going to find out in this video. Okay. The process which is responsible for this is known as respiration, and that is the process by which organisms combine oxygen with the degraded foodstuff molecules, nutrients, and convert the obtained energy into energy rich compounds like ATP, which form fuel for other cellular processes, is known as respiration. Okay, see, you all have learned about this in our previous video of digestion that the food we consume comprises various nutrients like carbs, proteins, and fats, which are present in their complex forms, right? But what happens after digestion is that the nutrients get broken down to their simpler forms, like starch gets degraded to its monomeric form glucose, proteins to amino acids, and lipids to fatty acids and glycerol. So now the energy we need, the energy we require, it is trapped, or we can say it is stuck up in the glucose molecule. And in order to release that energy from glucose, which is our degraded foodstuff, or we can say which is the digested nutrient, the glucose needs to be further broken down. It needs to be split up to release that energy. And that work of breaking down the glucose, that is carried out by our oxygen gas. Okay. And where do we get the oxygen from? Well, from the environment or the atmosphere, exactly, by breathing. Now, what will this oxygen do that we have inhaled in our system or inhaled in our bodies, we can say? That oxygen, what will it do to our glucose molecule? Let's see this in the following reaction. Okay, so here, as you can see, on the reactant side, we have our glucose molecule. The molecular formula is C6H12O6 and it reacts with oxygen, this glucose. This reacts with oxygen to give pyruvate, which further breaks down to release carbon dioxide, water, and energy. See, this is the basic reaction of respiration. Here our glucose is a 6 carbon molecule. We are calling it as a 6 carbon molecule because it has 6 atoms of carbon. And along with carbon, since it has 12 atoms of hydrogen and 6 atoms of oxygen, we call it as a molecule. So this is a 6 carbon molecule due to this 6 atoms of carbon. Okay. Now what will happen is our 6 carbon molecule glucose that will react with oxygen to form pyruvate. Okay. So this step, this formation of pyruvate from glucose, this step is called as glycolysis. Okay, I understand these two are very new terms for you now, the pyruvate and the glycolysis. So first let's get to know their meaning. Okay, the first term is pyruvate. So it is nothing but it is a 3 carbon molecule. Just like our glucose is a 6 carbon molecule, this one is a 3 carbon molecule. Okay, you don't need to remember this molecular formula at your level. It is just provided for the reference. So what happens is this pyruvate, it is produced by the process of glycolysis, which is the breakdown of glucose. See, the word glycolysis is a combination of two words, glyco and lysis, where glyco implies glucose and lysis means to break down. So we can say that glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose, occurs in the cytoplasm. Okay, so now our glycolysis, it is the process of breakdown of glucose to release pyruvate. Okay, and this process happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, I hope you are clear with the meaning of these two terms now. Now what happens is this pyruvate, okay, this pyruvate, this further breakdowns to release carbon dioxide, water, and energy. The carbon dioxide is produced, it is just a byproduct. It is no use for our system or our body, so we tend to exhale it while breathing. But this energy which is formed, it is required for our growth, for our daily activities, so we tend to keep it. and we tend to store it in the form of energy rich compounds like ATP. We will study about this ATP in the further slides. For now, you just need to remember that from glucose, this energy is produced, and this process is termed as respiration. This is the basic reaction. The entire process that I have depicted in this reaction is what we call as respiration. Okay, here the oxygen, it reacts with the glucose, which is the digested foodstuff, or we can say the degraded foodstuff or the digested nutrient, and convert this glucose to form energy. Okay, now our respiration can be of two types: aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Okay, the aerobic respiration, it occurs in the presence of oxygen. Okay, see, in this word aerobic, here the word aero is present. Aero implies or signifies air. Air means oxygen. So obviously the process of respiration which occurs in the presence of oxygen, that is known as aerobic respiration. Okay, and here, since you can see the prefix an is added before aerobic, so obviously it is the contrary or the opposite of aerobic respiration. So what happens in this one, it occurs in the absence of oxygen. Okay, so this is one of the major difference between these two modes of respiration. Okay, secondly, in the case of aerobic respiration, the end products are carbon dioxide and water. Okay, like you saw in the previous reaction, the previous slide in which there was a reaction was shown, that reaction was for aerobic respiration. Okay, on the contrary, what happens in anaerobic respiration, the end products which are formed are ethanol or lactic acid. So apart from energy which is released, the other end products which are formed in anaerobic mode are ethanol or lactic acid. Okay, so this is another difference between these two modes of respiration. Okay, now as you know, the glucose molecule, right, it breaks into pyruvate, which is a 3 carbon molecule, right? Now this pyruvate, it has different fates, or we can say it has different destiny, which depends on the availability of oxygen. Okay, now let's see the fate of pyruvate. So what happens is, see, our pyruvate is formed after the process of glycolysis in cytoplasm, right? Now what happens to the pyruvate in the following reactions, like in the first one? Okay, this is the first reaction in which this one we have already seen in the earlier slide. It is the fate of pyruvate in aerobic respiration, that is, which happens in the presence of oxygen. Okay, and this process, this occurs in the mitochondria. Now mitochondria, as you all know, it is an organelle which is also known as the powerhouse of cells, right? Here the pyruvate breaks down to release carbon dioxide, water and energy. Okay, this is a normal case situation, but sometimes what happens is, if you guys have observed, when you're doing some kind of muscular work like weightlifting, or your arms start to pain, right, or while you're running your legs start to ache, you start getting cramps. That's a case when anaerobic respiration happens in our body. See, since doing all kind of muscular stuff, it's a very obvious thing that you will require more energy than usual. So, in order to gain more energy, more oxygen is required, and that's the reason your breathing becomes faster while doing the muscular work, or while running. Your breathing becomes faster. You start panting, right? But still, the body is not able to inhale a high amount of oxygen in one go. Since obviously, as a human, we can't breathe that fast. We can't inhale a large volume of oxygen in one go. So, in that case, to compensate the need of energy, since obviously we're not having oxygen, so to get energy, we have to carry out a respiration without oxygen. Okay, so what happens is the pyruvate breaks in the lack of oxygen to release lactic acid and energy. Our lactic acid, it is also a 3 carbon molecule, and when this lactic acid, it starts accumulating in our muscle cells, that's when we start getting cramps. So this is the reason you get cramps while doing the muscular work. Our legs muscle starts to ache, our arm muscles starts to ache, right? So that's the reason for getting cramps here. This lactic acid, it starts accumulating in our muscles. Okay, Now, there's another type of anaerobic respiration which is known as fermentation, and that occurs in unicellular organisms like yeast. So, in that, what happens is the pyruvate it breaks in the absence of oxygen in yeast cells to release ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy. So, this one is a specific reaction for yeast cells. Okay, and this property of yeast, this property of yeast to release ethanol and carbon dioxide in absence of oxygen while breaking down the glucose at the pyruvate molecule, this property of yeast it is exploited in the beverage industry where the yeast is utilized for alcohol production, also in the food industry where it is used in bread making, since the carbon dioxide which is released it makes the bread porous and fluffy. Okay, I guess now we can define all three types of respiration, where the process that involves breaking down glucose in presence of oxygen to yield carbon dioxide, water, and energy as end products is known as aerobic respiration, right? The next we have anaerobic, the process that involves breaking down glucose in the absence of oxygen to yield lactic acid or ethanol and energy is termed as anaerobic respiration. And lastly, the anaerobic respiration that involves breaking down glucose in the absence of oxygen to release ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy by yeast cells is known as fermentation. Okay, I hope you are clear with all the three subtypes of respiration. Now, moving further. Okay, see, now our energy is produced in our body. Okay, but this task it is still not completed. The energy which is produced will be used to synthesize an energy rich molecule, and that molecule is ATP, right? It is adenosine triphosphate. See, this ATP, what is it? It is the unit of energy in the cell, or we can say it is the energy currency of the cell. Okay, what happens is the energy released during cellular respiration is immediately used so to synthesize a molecule called ATP from ADP and an inorganic phosphate. Okay, here are ADP, it is known as adenosine diphosphate. Okay, which means there are two molecules of phosphate. Okay, now it combines with an inorganic phosphate, which means the two molecules of phosphate, this ADP, it combines with a single molecule of inorganic phosphate to yield ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, right? That means 3 units of phosphate. So this is the energy currency of the cell. This is what we need in our bodies. Okay. Now the energy gets stored as ATP molecules in our cell. Later, when the cell will need energy, this ATP molecule will be broken down in the presence of water to derive its energy. Okay. So ATP molecule will be broken down in presence of water to derive this energy, and it's a fact that almost energy equivalent to 30.5 kilojoule per mole is released when one ATP molecule is broken down. Okay, so the energy which is released it's almost equivalent to 30.5 kilojoule per mole. Okay, now time for some key points to be noted. The first one is a large amount of energy is released in the case of aerobic respiration, 38 ATP molecules. Okay, so almost 38 ATP molecules are synthesized after one round of aerobic respiration. On the contrary, a very less amount of energy is released in the anaerobic mode of respiration. That is only 2 ATP molecules. See, these both are respiration. Okay, so in both types we will get energy. The only difference in this in terms of energy is that in aerobic mode we'll get more energy, 38 ATP molecules. Okay, but in anaerobic mode, since it is happening in absence of oxygen, we will get only 2 ATP molecules. That is, we will get only less energy. Okay. Now, aerobic respiration takes place in mitochondria. So, as you can note that the site for aerobic respiration in our bodies is mitochondria. So this basically means the pyruvate, which is synthesized after glycolysis in the cytoplasm, that needs to be moved to the mitochondria to produce energy after aerobic respiration, right? Whereas when we talk about the anaerobic mode, it occurs in cytoplasm. So as you can see, these are some points of differences between the two types of respiration that I had listed in this slide. Okay, now time for some activities. In the first activity, what you need to do is take some freshly prepared lime water in two test tubes and label them as A and B. Okay. In the next step, blow air through the lime water in one of the test tubes. Okay. Next, use a syringe to pass air through lime water taken in another test tube. Okay. We will notice that in both the test tubes, the lime water turns milky. It is because when we exhale, we release carbon dioxide. Okay, when we exhale, we release carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide, it reacts with the lime water, which is our calcium hydroxide, CaOH whole twice, to yield a white precipitate of calcium carbonate. Okay, this is the reaction which is happening in these two experiments. Okay, this calcium carbonate which is produced, it is a white ppt, and this is responsible for this milkiness which occurs in the lime water. Okay, however, you will notice that in the first case, the lime water turns milky at a faster rate. When we blow air by mouth, the lime water turns milky at a faster rate. But in the second case, in the second situation, when we provide the air by syringe, the lime water turns milky but at a slower speed, right? The difference in the speed of reaction in both the situation is the fact that in the syringe, atmospheric carbon dioxide is present, but in a very less amount. Whereas when we blow air by mouth, we tend to release or exhale a large quantity of CO2. So this is why there's a difference in the speed of reaction in both these experiments. So this experiment basically demonstrates that we exhale carbon dioxide while breathing. Okay. In the next exercise, we will take some fruit juice or sugar solution and add some yeast to it. Okay. Take this mixture in a flask fitted with one hole cork. Now, we have taken the fruit juice or a sugar solution, you can take anything, and we will add some yeast to it. And later, after mixing it, we will transfer this solution into a flask. Okay, this flask is fitted with a cork, a tight cork with a hole in it. Okay, and now we will add a bent glass tube in this, and one end of this tube that will be placed in a glass tube, in a test tube containing freshly prepared lime water. Okay, we will dip the free end of the tube into a test tube containing lime water. Okay, we will notice that the lime water turns milky. Why does this happen now? Well, we have already seen in our previous activity that lime water turns milky in the presence of carbon dioxide, right? So this means that the fruit juice or the sugar solution that we have prepared, that somehow released CO2, right? That passed through this bent tube. But how the fruit juice or how the sugar solution is having carbon dioxide? Well, the yeast that we added in it, that yeast broke down the sugar to release carbon dioxide, which turned lime water milky. Okay, so from this activity, we can infer or we can conclude the fermentative action of yeast on sugar. Okay, so here I end my video. Thank you.